On January 9, 2008, Sophie was brutally stabbed 216 times, with injuries concentrated on areas of her body that represented her beauty. This included stab wounds to her eyes, breasts, and genitals, indicating a disturbing intent to disfigure her rather than simply kill her. Her ex, jealous of her independence and success, had often belittled her, criticizing her appearance and demanding constant reassurance about his worth. This toxic dynamic warped into something far more sinister when he felt threatened by her plans for the future. Sophie's mother, Leslie, heard her daughter screaming for help and rushed to intervene. She found the bedroom door locked and had to force it open only to discover her daughter lying lifeless on the floor while Clayton was straddling her body, continuing his attack. What transforms a possessive ex-boyfriend into a calculating killer? When Sophie Elliott finally broke free from Clayton Weatherston's control, his obsession turned deadly, proving that sometimes the most dangerous monster isn't a stranger, but the person who claims to love you. Sophie Kate Elliott was born on a sunny day, June 11, 1985, in the lovely city of Dunedin, New Zealand. She was the youngest in her family, with two older brothers, Chris and Nick, who adored her. Sophie sparkled like a little diamond, lighting up the lives of everyone around her. Her dad, Gil, always remembered her as a strong and caring person who loved to help others. When Sophie turned 11, life changed a bit. Her oldest brother Nick moved away to Australia, and soon after, Chris followed him. With their dad often busy with work, Sophie and her mom, Leslie, became best friends. They shared everything and spent lots of time together. Sophie loved art and began taking ballet classes at just 4 years old. She also enjoyed playing the piano and exploring photography. She had a special way of seeing the beauty in the world that many others missed. Sophie was not only creative but also very smart. She worked hard in school and graduated from St. Hilda's Collegiate School with an award for being one of the top students. Her former principal said she was full of life and dreams. Her friends Lindsay and Jess admired her for being both clever and fun-loving. Sophie graduated with flying colors and began studying economics at the University of Otago. Her mom, Leslie, beamed with pride as she watched Sophie earn A+, and eventually a first-class honors degree. But just before her 22nd birthday in 2007, everything changed. One evening, while Sophie was working late at the university, her 33-year-old tutor, Clayton Weatherston, approached her and invited her to dinner. Sophie, trusting and kind-hearted, said yes. Clayton Robert Weatherston was born on January 9, 1976, in Dunedin and grew up in Green Island with his family. His mother described him as anxious and tense as a child, struggling to fit into new situations. At school, he was a bright student but faced challenges like bedwetting and poor eyesight, which he was too embarrassed to fix. As he approached the end of high school, Clayton set impossibly high standards for himself. He worked day and night, pushing aside extracurricular activities to focus solely on getting the best grades. His hard work paid off, and he finished at the top of his class in nearly every subject. But for Clayton, this was never enough. His obsession with perfection grew stronger when he started studying for a Bachelor of Commerce at Otago University in 1994. Clayton's anxiety before exams became a constant shadow during his 13 years at university. He was so fixated on achieving perfect grades that he often dropped classes or withdrew from courses if he feared he wouldn't get an A+. While his internal assessments were flawless, the pressure of exams overwhelmed him, causing him to feel sick with nerves. He confessed, "I just put a lot of pressure on myself. I was overanalyzing it." Eventually, Clayton decided to seek help at the Otago University Student Health Center. He talked about his anxiety and stress, receiving a medical certificate that allowed him to reset some exams. He was also prescribed Prozac, a medication used to treat anxiety and panic disorders. After 6 long years of study, Clayton graduated in 2000 and quickly pursued a postgraduate degree in economics. In 2003, he landed a job at the Treasury in Wellington, but just 9 months later, he returned to Dunedin unexpectedly, saying it was because of ongoing glandular fever. However, whispers around town suggested that Clayton had not made a good impression during his short time at the Treasury. In May 2004, Clayton began a new relationship with a woman who has chosen to stay anonymous. She saw two sides of him, a loving and generous side, but also a nasty and mean streak. Behind closed doors, he was insecure and easily upset. Sometimes he would say cruel things that hurt her feelings. Their romance came to a shocking end in late 2006 after a terrible incident where Clayton lost control, kicking her and jumping on her, which left her with a bleeding nose. A couple of years earlier, Clayton had bought his own home. As his scholarship money for his PhD studies began to dwindle, he managed to secure a tutoring job in the economics department at the University of Otago. In mid-2007, while working late one evening, he met one of his female students, 22-year-old Sophie Elliott. He asked her to dinner and she agreed. By July 2007, Clayton and Sophie were officially dating, but their 5-month relationship was anything but smooth. Just 3 weeks in, Sophie confided in her mother, Leslie. She shared her worries that Clayton often ignored her text messages and was frequently late for their dates. He loved to drink and socialize but rarely invited Sophie along. Instead, he expected her to pick him up from various events. There were times when days would pass without any word from him, and when they did talk, it was always Sophie who had to fit into his plans. Leslie noted that this was not a healthy start to a relationship. Clayton had an inflated sense of self-importance and believed Sophie was obsessed with him, which made him feel flattered. But there was a significant age gap. Sophie was 11 years younger than Clayton, which added even more complications to their already troubled relationship. At just 22 years old, Sophie's eagerness and innocence in her relationship with Clayton may have seemed like obsession to him. A former friend of Clayton noted that in 2007, he built an empire around himself, seeing himself as the king. Throughout their time together, arguments were common, often sparked by Clayton's need for reassurance about his sexual performance. He would frequently ask Sophie how he compared to her past partners and was fixated on the size of his penis. The constant fighting reached a breaking point when a frustrated Sophie finally admitted he wasn't number one in her eyes. Clayton's insecurities drove him to seek validation, but he was never satisfied with her answer. Early in their relationship, Sophie, once full of confidence, began to lose her self-esteem as Clayton criticized her appearance. He called her fat and ugly, insisting she needed to lose weight to be more appealing to him, pointing out flaws that deeply hurt her. Despite these challenges, Sophie didn't let her relationship with Clayton derail her dreams. In mid-2007, she traveled to Wellington and secured a spot in the Treasury's graduate program set to begin in January 2008. This was the same Treasury where Clayton had struggled to keep his job years earlier. His jealousy flared as he threatened to ruin Sophie's career by claiming he would use his contacts at the Treasury against her. Over the next 5 months, their relationship became a cycle of breakups and reconciliations. They would often split and not speak for days or even weeks before getting back together again. This tumultuous pattern frustrated Sophie's mother, Leslie, who felt that Clayton was manipulating Sophie's emotions. Leslie saw Sophie return home in tears only to reconcile with Clayton shortly after. The relationship was filled with Clayton's abusive behavior and constant criticism, leaving Sophie feeling increasingly confused and hurt. In November 2007, Sophie and Clayton's tumultuous relationship finally came to an end, giving them both a chance to move on with their lives. With her exams behind her, Sophie was excited to graduate and planned a holiday with her best friend, Jess, before her big move to Wellington. Meanwhile, Clayton completed his PhD and became Dr. Weatherston shortly before Christmas. On December 15, 2007, Clayton threw a party to celebrate his achievement, and Sophie attended as a friend. Being the caring person she was, she took pictures during the event and later created a photo album as a late Christmas gift for him. On December 27th, she went to his house to give it to him. However, Sophie returned home upset and shared what had happened with her mother. Leslie described the incident. Clayton invited Sophie to sit next to him and talk about their future. As he began to get close, Sophie made it clear she had no intention of getting back together and asked him to respect her wishes. When he suggested they go to the bedroom, she firmly told him it was over. Suddenly, his mood changed. He picked her up and carried her to his bedroom, throwing her roughly onto the bed. Sophie screamed as Clayton straddled her, placing one arm across her throat and covering her mouth with his hand. In the struggle, he hurled insults at her. Thankfully, he lost his grip, and Sophie managed to escape to her car. But Clayton followed her outside, opened the car door, and shouted that he hoped she would crash on her flight back from Australia. Later that day, Sophie wrote in her diary about the terrifying experience. She described how Clayton assaulted her when she tried to leave, calling him absolutely psycho. He told her she was horrible and ugly while pinning her down on the bed. She recounted how he pressed his forearm against her throat and covered her mouth to silence her screams for help. In her diary entry, she confessed feeling scared and panicky for the first time in such a situation. She knew Clayton was furious and unreasonable after that horrifying incident. On January 7, 2008, Sophie went to Clayton's office in the Commerce Building to confront him about their troubled past. He denied any wrongdoing, telling her that if she spoke up, people would think she was crazy. He even claimed to have told others that she had psychological issues. The next day, January 8th, friends reported that Clayton spent the entire day venting about Sophie. On January 9th, which was Clayton's 32nd birthday, he became obsessed with Sophie's social media accounts and decided to visit her house unannounced. Around 12:30 p.m., he arrived at the Elliott family home. Sophie's mother, Leslie, answered the door, and Clayton said he had a farewell present for Sophie. When Sophie asked who was at the door, Leslie told her it was Clayton. Sophie shrugged and told her mother to let him in. Sophie informed Clayton that she was busy packing for her move to Wellington and suggested they talk in her room while she continued her work. They went upstairs together, but shortly after, Sophie returned downstairs looking confused. She told Leslie that Clayton was just sitting there silently. Leslie advised Sophie to send him away since she had a lot of packing to do. Moments later, Leslie heard Sophie scream, "Don't! Clayton, don't!" Alarmed, she rushed upstairs to Sophie's bedroom but found the door locked. She kicked and pounded on the door, demanding Clayton open it. In a panic, she ran downstairs to grab her phone and dialed for help while taking a meat skewer with her back upstairs. As she heard Sophie screaming from inside the room, Leslie then heard a rhythmic thump that filled her with dread. Finally managing to open the door with the meat skewer, Leslie entered the room and saw Sophie lying on the floor. In that instant, she knew something was terribly wrong. Clayton stood over her, violently in the chest without stopping. He tried to push the door closed with his left hand while continuing his attack with his right. Leslie was still on the phone with emergency services when she screamed in horror at what she witnessed. "He's killed her," Leslie screamed into the phone. The operator urged her to leave the house immediately. As hard as it was, Leslie knew it was too late for her daughter, and she had to save herself. She ran to the end of the driveway and collapsed on the ground, overwhelmed. "I don't know why he didn't kill me. He could have easily done it. He was over 6 feet tall and a big guy, but he just shut the door. I think he knew that letting me live would cause him more stress than letting me die." Police Constable John Cunningham was the first officer to arrive at the scene. When he reached Sophie's bedroom, he found the door locked. He shouted that he would kick it in, but then heard the sound of the door unlocking. Inside, he saw Clayton standing at the end of the bed next to Sophie, who lay dead on the floor, covered in blood. Cunningham asked Clayton what he had done, and Clayton simply replied, "I killed her." The officer noted that Clayton appeared calm and coherent, not agitated or shaking. He seemed in control of himself with his hands by his sides. Cunningham then asked why he had killed her, to which Clayton responded, "The emotional pain she has caused me over the past year." When Cunningham inquired about the weapon, Clayton said he had used a knife. The officer pointed out a pair of scissors lying between Sophie's legs and asked about them. Clayton confirmed, "I used them at the end." Cunningham took Clayton outside and noticed blood smeared all over his arms, legs, and face. When asked about it, Clayton replied, "A little bit mine, mostly hers. The officer then asked who he had killed, and Clayton answered with chilling calmness, "It is Sophie Kate Elliott." Clayton was immediately arrested and taken into custody. The next day, forensic pathologist Martin Sage performed an autopsy on Sophie Elliott. He discovered that she had died from blood loss due to 2 wounds that pierced her heart and 1 lung, along with other injuries to her neck and throat. In total, she sustained 216 separate injuries, mostly stab wounds from a knife blade, with some inflicted by scissors. Additionally, there were 7 blunt force injuries and some defensive wounds on Sophie's body. The pathologist concluded that Clayton had targeted parts of her beauty, and these attacks seemed meant to disfigure her. When asked why he had cut specific areas, Clayton responded, "I don't know. It's just a coincidence." He claimed that the features he targeted were not important to him, saying, "You can't just have nice ears. It's the whole package." Dr. Sage noted that Sophie's eyes had been stabbed, even though they were closed, and multiple cut injuries were evident. Clumps of her hair had been cut off, and parts of her nose and right ear had been removed. He stated that Sophie's body showed signs of a persistent and determined attack. There were also 11 wounds to her left breast, with one of her nipples cut off. Dr. Sage expressed his outrage, saying it was upsetting that Clayton desecrated her body after killing her. Leslie Elliott later wrote about Sophie's injuries in her book, reflecting on the horror of what happened after she was dead, and God, how we hoped and prayed she was dead. He defiled her by cutting off her ears and nose, a nipple from her breast, and parts around her genital area. As a final indignity, he cut off some of her hair and laid it across her face. Clayton Weatherston's trial was scheduled to start on June 22, 2009. He pleaded not guilty to murder but admitted guilt to manslaughter, a move that sparked controversy and national debate. Clayton claimed he was provoked into killing Sophie and tried to paint her as the villain in their relationship. His lawyers portrayed Sophie as promiscuous and labeled her psycho girlfriend, suggesting that Clayton's unique personality made him unable to handle the situation. During the trial, it was revealed that Clayton had asked if he should be tested for an STD because he believed Sophie had slept with another man in Australia. He even suggested she had borderline personality disorder. Witnesses testified that Sophie had gotten very drunk one night and ended up in bed with someone described as Danish. Clayton was depicted as a complicated individual with deep-seated self-esteem issues and a crippling personality disorder. During his trial, Clayton took the stand to share his insecurities, a move that is usually strongly discouraged. His choice to testify only highlighted his need to control every aspect of his life and his misguided belief that he could manipulate the jury. The prosecutor questioned him directly, asking if he remembered specific events. "You remember doing all those things, right?" he pressed. Clayton responded hesitantly, I don't know. I would have." The prosecutor continued, "You told the truth when you remembered where the knife was when the officer asked you, didn't you?" Clayton struggled to recall, saying, "I had some time before the officer came into the room, but they were looking for the knife." Clayton's defense attorney, Judith Albert Kerr, argued that he had been provoked by the emotional turmoil of his 6-month relationship with Sophie. She claimed that Sophie had attacked him first with a pair of scissors, causing him to lose control. The defense opened their case by stating that while everyone knew who committed the act, Dr. Clayton Weatherston, the real question for the jury was whether he was a cold-blooded killer or a man who lost control due to provocation. Clayton told the court that on the day of his 32nd birthday, he had arranged to meet his mother in the afternoon and then planned to hang out with friends. This statement was meant to portray him as someone with normal intentions before the tragic events unfolded. That night, however, Clayton wanted to find Sophie to return the gifts she had given him. He drove from the university to her home, parked his car, and walked up the driveway carrying a plastic bag with the gifts and his laptop bag over his shoulder. He explained that he took the laptop bag because it contained a knife he always carried for protection and for cutting fruit while eating at the university. "I had carried it for some time around campus because I was concerned about my personal safety," he said. "There were assaults on campus all the time, and I often walked through it late at night." Clayton told the court that when he was in the bedroom with Sophie, he ended up attacking her because she lost her temper and pulled out scissors, provoking him. He claimed that during their argument, she lunged at him with the scissors, knocking off his glasses and leaving him feeling exposed and vulnerable. On the stand, Clayton appeared cocky and rude, believing himself to be superior and more intelligent than everyone else. The prosecution worked hard to prove that Clayton acted without provocation. Crown Prosecutor Marie Grills opened the murder case against him, stating that he set out to kill and disfigure Sophie in a calm and collected manner. She argued that he took the knife with him intentionally, highlighting the significant degree of premeditation involved in the crime. Grills described the horrific state of Sophie's body, noting clusters of wounds all over her body. She pointed out that her nose had been cut off symmetrically and chunks of hair were missing. There were clusters of up to 45 wounds on sensitive parts of her body, which Grills argued were no coincidence as they related to areas of physical beauty. The court learned that police arrived at the house 7 minutes after Leslie called 111 and that Clayton confessed on the scene to having killed Sophie Kate Elliott. The tumultuous nature of their on and off relationship was discussed, including a previous violent incident that had occurred on December 27, 2007. Finally, the prosecution explained that Clayton had wished Sophie dead because he believed she had ruined his chances of securing a permanent lecturer position at the university. He was jealous of her success and future at the Treasury. Robert Alexander, Sophie Elliott's supervisor in the economics department at Otago University, also worked with her boyfriend, Clayton Weatherston. Alexander noted that while Clayton regarded himself highly, he had significantly lowered his academic standing in Alexander's eyes after reading his thesis. Alexander described Clayton as someone intent on causing trouble due to his difficult attitude with others. He believed Clayton had little chance of success because of conflicts with department members, particularly after accusing 2 senior colleagues of plagiarism. After a 5-week trial, the jury returned with a verdict on July 22nd, finding Clayton Weatherston guilty of Sophie Elliott's murder. On September 15th, Justice Judith Potter sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 18 years. She rejected the defense's claim that Clayton was provoked, stating that she believed the killing was deliberate and controlled. Justice Potter noted that there were no words or actions that amounted to provocation and that there was no loss of self-control by Clayton. She also dismissed his assertion that he carried the knife for protection and considered the continued attack and mutilation of Sophie's body after her death. As she handed down the sentence, Justice Potter remarked that Sophie's death was a tragedy in every sense of the word. She added, "I am in no doubt this murder was committed with a high level of brutality and callousness." The courtroom fell silent as Clayton was sentenced. No one cried except for Sophie's mother, Leslie Elliott, who immediately broke down in tears. After the verdict was delivered, Leslie embraced her husband, Gil, while Clayton showed little emotion in the dock, his face merely twitching. Sophie's family released a statement saying that the 5-week trial had been painful. It has not been easy to sit daily in court and listen not only to graphic forensic evidence but also to distortions and embellishments of the truth about Sophie and her life, they said. They felt they had no choice but to watch it unfold, hoping for the best while Clayton could communicate freely with his legal team. Our lives will never be the same, but we are fortunate to have the unwavering support of family and friends. They have been our strength. The crime and trial received extensive media coverage, contributing to the government's decision to abolish the partial defense of provocation in murder cases. Women's Refuge stated that the justice system failed Sophie Elliott, allowing her killer to tarnish her name and continue persecuting her family after her death. Friends of Clayton Weatherston referred to Sophie as his psycho girlfriend just days after he killed her. In a letter from prison, he described her as a horrible person. Women's Refuge chief executive criticized the provocation defense as based on outdated notions about violence, stating that society once accepted an affront to male privilege as a reasonable excuse for violence. This trial turned justice inside out, she said, noting that Clayton became the victim while Sophie was portrayed negatively. Fortunately for Clayton Weatherston, the jury did not accept his narrative, nor did the hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders who watched him giggle on television. The case served as a reminder that extreme partner violence can occur in all sectors of society, not just among couples living together. The agency highlighted that this was an educated and articulate man who resorted to violence in response to relationship pressures. They urged people who knew someone at risk from a partner to encourage them to seek help, warning that signs like possessiveness, jealousy, stalking, and controlling behavior are not part of a healthy relationship and should be taken seriously.